Hi there, Alex from stakefish here, and I'm going to give you a little analysis of the Ethereum 2 deposits so far that stakefish has received, and then give you a little tutorial on how you can do a similar analysis yourself. So right off the bat, one thing that you'll notice is that over the last year or so of receiving Ethereum deposits, we have one particular account that has made a significant number of deposits and in a large amount, and then subsequently smaller amounts and getting into a very fine array toward the end. Now, finally, when we look at the transactions individually, we can see that there's this really interesting distribution. We have a collection of folks out in the range of 3,210, and then a really significant amount in the range of 32. And what does that really mean? Well, without looking at the smart contract code, you can kind of guess that this is the upper limit of what the smart contract would allow for. And then 32.1 ETH would be the minimum amount. So here's some basic stats. We can see that there were 390 unique accounts that interacted with the smart contract, and that the average deposit per contract call was about 425 Ethereum. The maximum deposit was, as we just mentioned, 3,210, and the minimum was 0, but that was just one failed transaction. The median, though, and we just saw this on the previous graph, is 32.1 ETH. So from that data, we can derive some insights. We can see that the deposits were overwhelmingly skewed toward the minimum amount required, and this hints at a generally risk-averse user base. Users don't want to put in more than what they need to really find out, does the system work the way it is expected to work? We also notice, if you dive into it, that a small contingent of users made really large total deposits. And we saw that on the pie chart. That was the first 10 or so larger triangles. In terms of performance, we saw that the number and value of transactions was high in the first 2 months, but then tapered relatively quickly. And the overall growth in deposited Ethereum took a logarithmic shape. That is to say that it kind of curved up, but then flattened out rather than exponential. And whenever you see a logarithmic shape, that tends to indicate that there's some kind of a limit or a barrier that's being observed. In this case, we can hypothesize that it's a limit on the users that are capable or willing to deposit a minimum of 32 Ethereum. So from here, I'd like to talk a little bit about how you can get this data to generate insights on your own and what other further insights you could make. So here on Etherscan, I happen to be pointing at a very specific set of transactions for the Ethereum 2 depositor, but I'm going to go back a little bit and just show you how to go straight from the beginning. Etherscan provides a really useful tool. If we go into More and then look at Smart Contract Search, we can actually search for smart contracts based on their name. And in this case, we're going to look for stakefish. And sure enough, we see a batch deposit. If we click on this, it gives us a little bit more details. We can see that there were 622 transactions, and we're going to check those out. And it looks like it was first deployed on November 18th of 2020. And here's a listing of the different transactions. What we're going to do is scroll all the way down to the bottom, and they have a little tool to do CSV export. And what we'll want to do is to change the range. So we're going to roll back in time. We'll start from before the launch of the contract and run it up until the end of this month. And go through the CAPTCHA just to prove that we are human. And it's processing our CSV. From there, you can pick the spreadsheet tool of your choice. And in this case, I'm going to go with Google Sheets. And I'll pull the CSV over to here. We can have it detect automatically. CSVs are a fairly common data format. And here we have this really nice spreadsheet that actually gives a lot of different information. In particular, what we're going to be most interested in is the value in, because that's what people are depositing. We'll be interested in the from address because that will be who is depositing, and perhaps the date time. Now what we'll do is I'll show you a cleaned up version of this same data and what that looks like. So here you can see date time simplified down to a year and a month, the transaction hash, the from, the value in, and I took the transaction fee as well, just because I thought it'd be interesting. Using that information, you can then start to organize it, and you can summarize the data based on an address, and you can see how much one particular address deposited in total. And if you sort that, you get really clean and interesting information like this. Those are the very graphs we just showed earlier. Now, what's also useful about this is that we can look at exactly how many people are depositing a particularly large amount. So if we look at this, we can see that these folks will have a lot of validators associated with their deposits. And after, about 81 or so depositors, the value tapers off pretty significantly. And we see that as well when we look at this particular chart. The other thing that we can do is we can aggregate deposits, total amounts per month. And that can give us the total deposited Ethereum over time. Now, beyond that original information that you got from the CSV, another thing that you could do is you could look at the addresses and then try and find out one more piece of data. For example, were they active in the last 90 days? Let's just take one address at random. We'll copy that, come back to Etherscan, and we'll search for that address. And we can see that the last transaction that it did was about 87 days ago. So from there, we can see that it's actually quite active. And we can also take some analysis of their deposits and see, did they do a single deposit or did they do multiple deposits over time? And when you do this kind of analysis, you can start to break down user behavior as well. So for example, if a user in this bracket was active in the last 90 days, they would have a median of $680,000 worth of deposits. And if they were not active in the last 90 days, you would see that they had a median of 2.4 million in value that they deposited. That's kind of interesting. You wouldn't necessarily expect that, that less active accounts would have more value put into a particular smart contract. You can also single out the difference between people who deposited once versus people who deposited multiple times. And you can see, and this would make sense, of course. If you do more deposits over time, you should expect a higher amount. And then lastly, you can compare on the basis of two different variables, which is, did they do a single deposit and have they been active in the last 90 days? Or did they do multiple deposits and were they inactive in the last 90 days? And you can see that indeed, the people who did multiple deposits and don't have particularly active accounts deposited the most overall. And it's a quite surprising multiple relative to the folks who would do a single deposit. Hopefully that gave you a good overall view of how to do a basic analysis of a smart contract. Of course, if you have any questions, be sure to come on over and visit us at Stakefish. Thanks for watching.